Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on how Listenwise can accelerate your district learning plans this fall. I'm delighted that you've joined us, and I know there'll be others joining us shortly as well, but I thought we'd kick this off and get this underway. So first, just to introduce myself, I will be presenting today. My name is Monica Brady-Meyerov. I'm the founder of Listenwise and also the author of the new book that was just published by Wiley, Listenwise, which teach students to be better listeners. And this book is really a culmination of everything that I've learned about listening and learning since I've created Listenwise. So I highly encourage you to pick it up. It's got a lot of great lessons and tips and research. This has been a journey for me. I started as a public radio reporter and reported for NPR for nearly 20 years before realizing that listening really has the power to captivate and engage students. And I wanted to focus my efforts on making the most impact there. So really went deep into the field of listening, and I share it in this book. And one of the registered attendees today will win a copy of the book, which I will share out via email in the coming days. So thanks you all for coming. And today we are going to be talking about how listening can accelerate learning, especially for your English language learners, how it can help students spark academic conversation with real world topics, and also supports reading comprehension and this whole interconnection between reading and listening. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can use American Rescue Plan funds for supporting your students with listening through Listenwise. But first, I just want to acknowledge that we know the pandemic has created many challenges for students and deepened disparities for some as a result of the school closures. So given the disruptions to learning and the challenges that COVID presented, Listenwise is a great way to provide that extra support to help all students stay on grade level, keep them engaged, and accelerate their learning. Podcasts are the perfect tool to support standards-aligned instruction and also help integrate SEL, which I'll be showing you and talking you about a lot today as well. The storytelling, the human emotion that comes with audio make them the perfect medium to build SEL skills that prepare your students to be thoughtful, engaged, and connected. So we hear that teachers love using our standards-aligned lessons and podcasts so that all of their students, including their ELs, are engaged in rigorous activities. So I can't wait to also share how the data insights can help you as well inform and measure your student growth, because that's an important part of learning as well. So you may all be familiar with what Listenwise is, but I just thought I'd take a minute and say, again, I created this resource because as a public radio reporter, I was creating these stories that had so much to do with science, social studies, English language arts. And I realized through my own children that they could be using these stories in the classroom, but there was nowhere for teachers to find them in an easy to search format that had standards, lessons, and all the supports that you need. So Listenwise is an online learning platform with more than 2,500 curated podcasts that are ready to use for grades 2 through 12. They are especially good for intermediate to advanced English language learners, and I'll talk a lot about how listening supports language development, but it's proven to boost students' academic achievement and college readiness. You've got to get your students working on their listening skills to be ready for college and career, and that's an important part of what we'll be talking about today. First of all, teaching with podcasts can support a variety of instructional goals. Using nonfiction audio stories like news stories that connect students with what students are learning with the world beyond school make it an easy way to do that. And we put up a new current event every school day that is addressing a news topic of the week. These stories are important, they're engaging, they're things like the end of the war in Afghanistan. Maybe you want to talk about that and look at the historical perspective of it. We can help you with that with a 3 to 5 minute podcast story to get that going. So Listenwise can also spark conversations about these topics. Listening to a story, let's say, about different policies that schools have around cell phone use could be used to create a debate in your class. And we always have a story that is a debate topic every Friday so that you can spark that conversation. It's the other side of that standard listening and speaking. We want your students to be listening and then engaging in thoughtful conversations about what they heard. Also, listening to quality stories that are rich in academic language can build academic vocabulary. And as you probably already know, every state has a standard for speaking and listening, and 22 states test listening in their high stakes exam. So you've got to be thinking about how are you going to prepare your students for the listening portion of the ELA test so that they can improve their scores. Now, in our conversations with district leaders, we know that English learners have a lack of exposure to academic language. So if you're thinking about priorities for your district and they involve ELs, you might be thinking about how these students have spoken and heard very little academic language at home in the past year and a half. They need more opportunities to practice their spoken language. It's a serious concern, and it's one of the things that we really do best. And I'll be even playing some of that for you to demonstrate how these stories can bring rich academic language into the classroom. Students can also, listening can also help students build background knowledge with content. So many of the language standards talk about how it's not enough just to learn language for language's sake, but you should be learning language as it relates to a topic. For instance, we have a story about the birth of Homeland Security following 9/11 and how that created a bureaucracy around safety, but also was an important development in keeping the country safe. So it can help students build background knowledge around content that they're covering in science, social studies, and ELA. And finally, the platform allows for personalization, and that's just necessary to meet everyone's needs. We also know it's important for you as administrators to know how your students are doing. So Listenwise has online multiple choice quizzes that are auto-scored. They're listening quizzes. No other platform has a listening quiz. This quiz is modeled after the SBAC, so the quizzes simulate the experience of taking an online listening assessment. And we're building skills across 4 listening strands. So students can see if students can understand the literal meaning. Can they understand a vocabulary word in context? Do they get the main idea of the story? And can they make an inference? These all must sound familiar to you because they are what students need to do in reading. Well, as we'll talk about in a moment, how integral and linked listening is to reading. So building these skills in listening will help your students in reading as well. They are core literacy skills that will serve them well across all disciplines. And as I mentioned, every state has a listening standard. So digging into these skills particularly will help your students prepare for their test, as well as if they're an English language learner, they'll be taking a listening test every single year that they're designated as ELs. So this quiz with this progress monitoring can be a great way for your students to practice listening for the tests. And it's really important to give students time to practice their listening muscle and build their listening stamina. So our platform also allows for cohort tracking, and the quiz results can be downloaded. They can be imported into student information systems for systematized for targeting improvements. Let me just remind you, you can also pop a question into the chat. Anytime you have one, I'm happy to take questions and have more of a dialogue about this. I wanted to let you know that our data has shown that students who have used Listenwise once a week have shown improvement in their SBAC scores. This is taken from data with our district partners in California. And we wanted to update it every year, but as you're aware, testing was not administered this year or many states last year. Well, last year, definitely not administered. This year, also often not administered. But anecdotally, we've been hearing that in the pandemic, teachers tell us how much students love using Listenwise. It's engaging. It doesn't have to be on a screen because listening can be in your ear pods. Listening can be without having to look at something and do something. And it doesn't, so it can be done asynchronously. It can be in class, it can be online, very flexible and easy. The other thing is that we easily integrate with your LMS, including Canvas, Schoology, clever. And the most popular integration, Google Classroom. With Google Classroom, we have SSO, rostering, and gradebook sharing. So this gives teachers the ability to launch Listenwise as an app in their classroom. Super easy to use, and we know how important that is with so many tools out there. Listenwise is also evidence-based. When listening to high quality stories, all students are learning English. All students are learning in the same way because they're all listening to the same thing. So the evidence, that we build on is the simple view of reading by Goff and Tumner. So listening comprehension is a fundamental building block of reading comprehension development. In the simple view of reading by Goff and Tumner, it suggests that reading is a function of two key components, decoding and language comprehension. So if you focus on language comprehension, that's where listening plays a large part. It's made up of listening and vocabulary, and it plays a part in fluency. So listening, especially while reading, helps kids recognize sounds and letters, helps them learn new words. They become better listeners, and they also understand how stories work. So as students grow older, the relative importance of listening comprehension increases because it takes until the middle school years to reach the point where reading comprehension outpaces listening comprehension. So one study shows that as students get older, problems with reading comprehension emerge. So providing an opportunity to have content that is auditory can help close that content gap. Because when listening, students can understand texts at a higher grade level than they can read. When they're in the younger grades, it can be 2 grade levels higher. Imagine that they're listening to a story that is 2 grade levels higher than they can read. Think about all the opportunities that provides you. And that's in part because their receptive vocabularies are typically higher than their expressive vocabularies. Now, that's especially true for English learners. That's why it's important to focus on students' listening skills well beyond the years of direct instruction. So I hope that graph gives you some thinking about how to incorporate listening comprehension through all the grades, because it's still an important part of learning. So one of the ways, as I said, that listening can help is through academic vocabulary. And I want to take a look at an example from Listenwise and play you a short story. This story has it's 30 seconds long, okay? And it has 7 academic tier 2 words or cross-disciplinary words. I'm going to pop over to Listenwise and just play it for you. And I want you to listen for the words familiar, traveled, resident, recently, lounging, reunited, and current. We're going to focus more closely on 2 of these words, but let's just have a listen and you'll see how the interactive transcript supports the reading and vocabulary development.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. Sometimes all you want is a familiar front porch. Maybe that's what was going through the mind of a yellow lab named Cleo when she traveled 60 miles to her family's old house in Lawson, Missouri. They moved out in 2018. The new residents recently came home to find Cleo lounging on the porch. She's since been reunited with her family at their current address. No one knows how she traveled those 60 miles, but it must be a really great front porch.
So these weird news stories are really fun. They're things that kids are going to be immediately engaged by and remember. And yet we're packing in a lot of vocabulary there in 30 seconds. And in our assignment resources, we focus the questions on using the vocabulary. So why were the residents of the dog's old house surprised to find her lounging on their porch? So you could say to your students, answer that question either in writing or verbally using the word resident and lounge. Just great way to easily sneak in a lot of extra vocabulary words for your students with them listening to an engaging story. So let me pop back here. One of the things that we do best, we think, is support and engage our long-term ELs, because really the biggest barrier they have is reclassifying them as their development of this academic language. They've had social language for a long time, but the academic language is harder, and it's harder for teachers to be able to use the variety of words they need to be exposed to. Now, you just heard a good example of a short, engaging story with a lot of vocabulary. We have thousands of these types of stories. Another benefit is that podcasts can equalize access to engaging academic content for all students, allowing ELs and struggling or reluctant readers to learn with the exact same core material as everyone else. So when you are leveling a text, you're often scaffolding it down, right? You're leveling it down to where the student is. But when you're listening to a story on Listenwise, the audio is always the same, and we scaffold the supports up to the student. So audio storytelling can offer an equity lever to bring the world to students without leveling down content or expectations, especially for students who are reading below grade level. Another great thing about audio, and why I love it so much, is that it is a full brain experience. When you are hearing, your brain is making a movie in your mind. This is what the neuroscience research says about listening. You are engaging multiple areas of your brain, including the visual cortex, the part that controls movements, and even the area that's related to taste and flavor, if you're listening to a story about how food smells or tastes. So this makes listening a highly engaging medium for instruction. And listening can also build empathy. As in authentic podcasts, you hear the voices of people who are affected by the story. You hear their accents, you hear their emotions. And I want to play just a little bit of that because building this understanding and empathy through listening is research-based and very interesting and exciting way for your students to be kind to each other and start understanding the perspective of others. This story I'm going to play just a little bit of is about a museum exhibit that simulated what it was like to be a refugee. So you hear people experiencing some of the things that refugees go through. Again, I'll just show you the interactive transcript as well.
Here's an effort to make you know what it feels like to walk in the shoes of a refugee. More than 65 million people around the world have been forced to leave their homes. The UN says they're fleeing violence, persecution, disasters. Doctors Without Borders hopes to show Americans what that life is like. They have a traveling exhibit they're taking to cities across the Northeast. NPR's Narit Eisenman joined the tour when it stopped in Washington, D.C.
Hi guys, how are you?
Our guide is Dr. Ahmed Abdelrazak, who normally works in a refugee camp in Tunisia. And he tells our little group to imagine that war has just broken out. We're going to have to leave our homes, our town. Then he takes us to this wall hung with plastic cards listing our most essential possessions. And he makes a startling announcement.
So what will I ask you guys? In 30 seconds, pick only 5 items.
In other words, we have 30 seconds to go through the cards and pick just 5 things to take with us. Abdelrazak holds up a stopwatch.
Okay, in 30 seconds, go.
There's a mad scramble for the cards.
5 items only.
Rita Keitzer, she's a 55-year-old homemaker, drove 2 hours from Virginia just for this tour. She looks preoccupied. Is it hard?
Yeah, I have a lot of choices.
10 seconds.
I had to really look it over.
2, 1, you're out of time.
Abdelrazak inspects our picks.
What did you get here?
Cash, blankets, medicine. He notices no one brought shoes. Possible mistake. During the 1991 Persian Gulf War, when Abdelrazak was a kid, Saddam Hussein's government started bombing his town in southern Iraq. He and his family had to run.
So we walked and we walked. We walked for 10 days. 10 days non-stop. I remember I had flip-flop on my feet. On the 10th day, I had nothing on my feet.
No matter.
So I think that's a great example of hearing people's voices and experiences, and the way that the story is constructed makes you feel this anxiety building. I'd love to hear in the chat if you have reactions to it, because I'm just talking about how I feel listening to it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, because I feel like the way they use the countdown, okay, go grab what you think you're going to need. And then to hear these people really feeling the experience of it, and then to hear the refugee's experience in his own words about what it was like to flee his country, his home, very quickly. So it can be a very immersive experience really quickly. That was only about 1.5 minutes of audio. And as I said, most of the stories on our platform are between 3 and 5 minutes. So getting it up and running in a classroom is super easy, and it quickly takes you outside of the 4 walls or outside of wherever your students are and puts them into the scene. And as Redine Sims Bishop describes this power of literature to provide students with windows, mirrors, and doors, podcasts, like other instructional texts, are stories that can demonstrate how we can offer this windows, mirrors, and doors that deepen and enrich our students' learning experiences. So through listening to podcasts like the one we just heard, students may find their experiences reflected and validated as in a mirror. They might better understand experiences other than their own life as if observing through a window. And they may, for a brief moment, feel as if they're walking in someone else's shoes through a door into another person's world. I think that story I just played captures a little bit of that, but I encourage you to explore our collection. You can sign up for free at listenwise.com, and you can, I would recommend you opt to take the free premium trial, or even consider getting one for several teachers in your school. And I'll remind you of that at the end, how to do that. But just reviewing the collection can help you see how these stories provide these windows, mirrors, and doors to your students. So we know that SEL is top of mind, and Listenwise stories feature people representing a variety of races, ethnicities, cultures, classes, abilities, and identities. Podcasts can engage students in social and emotional learning while they also build academic vocabulary, background knowledge, and practice comprehension and other literacy skills, as I showed you in the quizzing as well. But it's a great way to just foster a culturally responsive classroom, and also to bring up some difficult subjects and have students open up so that when they're listening to a podcast and hearing somebody else talk about their experiences, maybe they'll feel more comfortable sharing their own. Now let's turn for a minute to talk about funding. So the federal government, as you know, has provided an influx of funds to help you accelerate learning. In the most recent American Rescue Plan, the language of the law is very clear that lost learning time and it can be coupled with historically marginalized populations. So the ability for the funding to support our English learners is really focused in this learning loss category, of which there's more than $24 billion allocated. And while the law doesn't clearly specify who should be targeted for the funding, I believe that immigrant students, migrant students, students with disabilities who've experienced homelessness, who are English learners, I think the spirit of the law is intended to help support those students and help them accelerate. We know there's a lot of flexibility in that, but we want you to think about how are the ways, and know that there are many ways to get the right supports for these students who desperately need the extra time and attention this school year to bring them back up to speed to where they are. Now, why spend the money now? Because these funds are available over the coming years. But I wanted to share with you that there's a new study just out by EdWeek that I'm sharing with you that found the majority of administrators plan to spend the money from the two most recent stimulus measures by the end of this school year. So it's taking that 41% and 11%. 11% have already spent it, and 41% say they're going to spend that allocation by the end of this academic fiscal year, 2021-22. Now, why do that? The reason they're saying is it's a good time because it's critical to get the money working quickly, to get students back on track, or to accelerate their learning and address the losses that have happened over the pandemic. So the dollars need to be put to work now. And evidence shows that we can't wait longer to make these investments. So I just thought you'd find that interesting to share that bit as well. So that concludes the main part of the webinar. I'd love to take your questions if you have them, but I also wanted to recommend to you that you can get a free district pilot. If you're interested, put your name and email in the chat. You can also have school access, start a free school trial today by registering at listenwise.com. Listenwise is free for teachers. You can always access our collection of current events. And we also have lessons and many other supports that are in premium that you can experience by taking a free trial of premium, either as a single teacher or as a school. Or if you're interested in something larger, we're happy to help you with that by offering you a free district pilot. I know this back to school year is not as we'd all hoped it would be, as smooth and coronavirus free. We're here to support you, and we want to help you with the tools that you need to get your students back on track, accelerate their learning, and make sure they have a successful year. So we would love to help you in any way. And like I said, please put your name in the chat and email if you're interested in a district pilot, or you can just go online to listenwise.com and sign up by yourself. So I want to thank you, and I will be, like I said, emailing the book winner in the coming days. Very excited that you've all joined me to hear a little bit more about what's in Listenwise, the book, as well as Listenwise, the tool for your students. So I really hope that you'll take a moment and share this with your staff, your team members, use it yourself if you're a teacher in the classroom, and just really think about how Listenwise and listening can help student achievement in so many ways through literacy and language development. Thank you very, very much for attending this webinar.